Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. Welcome to John Mackintosh Hall Theatre for GibTalks 2017. I have to say, it's very gratifying to see so many people here already on this wet Saturday morning. Some familiar faces as well, some true veterans of GibTalks, and I'm sure they will be joined by many others over the course of the day. We're very proud to be able to say that this is our third edition of GibTalks. And for the next 7 hours, with an hour's break for lunch, these walls will once again echo with the sound of members of our community who have all come here with something to say. Now, normally at this stage of the proceedings, what happens is that I stand here and I tell you how GibTalks works. I explain what GibTalks is all about. So I tell you about the 15-minute time limit, or 10 minutes in the case of our Vox Pop speakers. I tell you about how there's a monitor up there on the balcony counting down the time, and how the traffic light turns red when that time runs out, and how if our speakers start taking liberties with the time limit, Tanya will be standing by backstage with the famous horn. I tell you about how our lineup represents a cross-section of the community with speakers from a wide range of backgrounds. I tell you about how your ticket entitles you to the event for the whole day. And you can use the schedule to plan your day. You can come and go as you please, in and out. Or you can just simply watch the whole thing, as we've found many people have been doing over the past few years. But this year, I'm not going to do that. And I'm not going to do that for a number of reasons. Firstly, because I've pretty much just done it right now. Secondly, because, as I said, this is our third edition, and many of you are very familiar now with how GibTalks works, whether you've seen it live or whether you've watched it on GBC. Thirdly, if you don't know how GibTalks works, I'm pretty sure you'll pick it up very quickly because it really isn't that complicated. But lastly, and for me, the most important reason why I won't be doing that this year is because what happens every year is that I come here, I explain how GibTalks works, and then I spend the rest of the day backstage watching other people get their chance to tell their stories. And I thought to myself, for as long as I'm presenting GibTalks, I'm never going to get the chance to tell any of my stories. So this year, I thought I'd do things differently. And having made that decision, of course, the next step was to decide which story to tell you. Now, I could tell you, with a little bit of exaggeration, about the time when I almost got shot on an exercise with the Air Cadets. I could tell you about when I almost got run over by Academy Award-winning actor Mark Rylance outside the stage door of the Globe Theatre. Or I could tell you about the time when a man sitting next to me on a train just randomly started talking, and out of politeness, I started a conversation with him until he turned around to me and revealed he was on a hands-free kit. And these are all good stories, but GibTalks deserves better. So instead, I could tell you about the young boy who dreamt of being a priest, but went on to become Chief Minister of Gibraltar. Or I could tell you about the man who was a priest, but also went into the world of politics. I could tell you about an academic's vision for Gibraltar in 2020, or about the young girl who fell in love with theatre, leading into a career in broadcasting. I could tell you about a woman's battle with depression, or about how education changed over the course of a teacher's career. I could tell you about a search for dragon trees, or about standing in a buffet queue next to the most powerful man in European basketball. I could tell you about the children of the Raj, or about how our rock has inspired one of our best-known artists. I could tell you about a new mum on the rock, or about a child who was born 11 weeks too soon. I could tell you about how emotional intelligence can shape our future leaders. Or I could tell you about how we can save the world one light bulb at a time. I could tell you about a man's passion for cycling, or about the importance of failure. Or I could just tell you about Richard Cartwright's face. For those were the stories that we heard in GibTalks 2016. But I could go 12 months further back in time and tell you about a politician who was stabbed in broad daylight in front of his son. or about a former politician who had a moment of epiphany on the road to Malaga airport. I could tell you about the man who was sent to prison for standing up for what he believed in, or about a year that saw a change of government and 3 dead IRA terrorists. I could tell you about some troubling predictions for Gibraltar's population growth, or I could tell you about the relationship between gender and neurons, or I could tell you about any of the many other stories that we also heard in GibTalks 2015. For that is exactly what GibTalks is all about bringing members of our community to this stage and giving them an opportunity to tell some amazing stories. And for the next 7 hours, with an hour's break for lunch, you're going to hear from some incredible storytellers. You will hear from a man who knelt in front of the Queen and felt her sword on his shoulder. You'll hear from a young lady who formed part of the biggest celebration of human sporting aspiration. You'll hear from a woman who has trained generations of local dancers, and you will hear from one of Gibraltar's golden couples. You'll hear from a poet who has taken Gibraltarian poetry to the very heartland of our Spanish neighbors. And you'll hear from an artist whose work has adorned the walls of the Royal Academy itself. You'll hear from a man who works on the front line of the European refugee crisis. And you'll hear from another man who's worked in a different kind of front line and felt its effects. You'll hear from a former teacher who moved to our rock and felt the culture shock of our idiosyncrasies. And you'll hear from the woman who oversees our financial services. You will hear from a Muslim woman proud to wear her hijab. And you'll hear from Gibraltar's most introspective blogger. You'll hear from an amateur historian with a plethora of anecdotes. And you'll hear from a young lady who is finding happiness through her disability. You will hear from the reigning Mr. Gibraltar and from a man who comes here with a message of peace. You will hear from a young lawyer and from an even younger student. And all these people have come here with stories that they want to share with you. From hijabs to amateur dramatics, from the Olympics to a mother-in-law's rolitos, from ballet to the Janito language, from the imperceptible to making a marriage work, from Jebel Tariq to happiness, from refugees to creativity, from cerebral palsy to white poppies, from pride to procrastination, all wrapped up in a message of what's next for Gibraltar. Ladies and gentlemen, today, for the 3rd year running, GibTalks.